The first knock came 3 nights after I buried my daughter. 3 soft taps, spaced exactly like her failing heartbeat in the hospital. I told myself it was wind, a branch, an animal. But then came the second night, and the third. Each knock perfectly timed, perfectly measured, perfectly hers. I came to this cabin to escape the sound of machines keeping her alive. Now, every night at 3:17 a.m., her final minute, someone knocks on my door. And whatever stands outside knows my daughter better than I ever did.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. You Can't Outrun the Dead. The road into the northern woods narrowed until it became little more than a cracked ribbon of asphalt, buckling under years of frost and neglect. Daniel Mercer drove it slowly, not because the truck struggled, but because he did. Every few minutes his fingers tightened around the steering wheel, as though clinging to the thin belief that this isolated drive, this endless corridor of pine and shadow, might finally silence the memories. But memories had a way of speaking louder the quieter the world became. Daniel had told himself that out here, far from town, far from sympathetic neighbors who spoke his daughter's name too softly, far from the echoing halls of his home filled with all the things she left behind, he might heal. That isolation would scrub the ache clean. But as the cabin appeared through the trees like an abandoned thought half buried in snow, a familiar sentence whispered in his mind. You can't outrun grief, you can only hear it echo. He had repeated that phrase every night since the funeral, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a curse. Tonight, as the truck rolled to a stop before the sagging porch, it sounded more like a prophecy. The cabin was older than he remembered from the listing photos, its wooden siding warped, its roofline drooping toward the earth as though exhausted. Moss clung to the shingles like something trying to pull the structure back into the ground. The windows were blackened mirrors, reflecting distorted shapes of the surrounding pines. He climbed the creaking steps, noting how the boards flexed under his weight. The smell hit him first, damp wood, stale smoke, and something faintly metallic, a scent that didn't belong to the forest. Inside, the air felt colder than the night outside. Dust motes drifted in slanted beams of moonlight. Each breath Daniel took seemed to stir the house awake. The floorboards groaned, not just under his footsteps, but after them, as though something beneath the planks exhaled in response. He tried to ignore it. He told himself old houses settle, old wood complains, old grief leaks into everything. But the cabin didn't just seem old. It seemed aware. He set his suitcase on the warped dining table, listening to the dim hum of wind through the eaves. Hours passed as he unpacked clothes, stacking clothes in a narrow dresser, shoving linens onto shelves, placing a framed photo of his daughter face down on the nightstand. He refused to look at it tonight. He wasn't ready to see her smile outside of memory. By the time darkness swallowed the final traces of twilight, Daniel settled by the brick fireplace, coaxing a small flame to life. Heat flickered against peeling wallpaper, turning the room into shifting shades of amber and black. For a moment, he almost felt himself relax. The fire crackled, the forest outside rustled. His breathing slowed. Then he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound from inside the walls. Thump, 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 thump. He froze. The rhythm was subtle, muffled by layers of wood and insulation. If he weren't already on edge, he might have mistaken it for a distant branch tapping the siding. But something about the timing, its unnatural steadiness, its hollow pulse, made the hairs along his arms rise. He held his breath. Thump, thump, thump. There it was again. Quiet, deliberate, wrong. Daniel stood slowly, listening. The sound didn't match the creaks of settling timber, it didn't sync with the wind, and it certainly didn't belong in the walls of an empty cabin. His chest tightened. It was a heartbeat, slow, uneven, familiar. The same broken pattern he had listened to in a hospital room, where machines beeped and monitors blinked, and hope fell apart one pulse at a time. He shut his eyes. It's in your head, he told himself. You're tired. You're grieving. You're hearing what you expect to hear. When he opened them, the sound had stopped. Only the fire remained, whispering up the chimney. For a moment, Daniel thought he imagined everything. Then, the wall beside the fireplace shuddered, barely. A tremor so slight he would have missed it had he not been staring directly at the warped wooden panel. The cabin groaned, a long, low moan that vibrated through the floorboards and into his bones. Daniel stepped backward until his calves hit the armchair. "You can't outrun grief," he whispered softly, the sentence tasting like cold iron in his mouth. And tonight, in the hollow heart of the northern woods, something inside the cabin echoed back.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. The Cabin Knows Why You're Here. Morning crept into the cabin reluctantly, as though the sunlight itself didn't want to cross the threshold. Thin beams broke through the curtains, pale and sickly, barely warming the cold wooden floor. Daniel woke stiff and unrested, his back pressed into the lumpy mattress, his breath fogging faintly in the air. The fire had died some time in the early hours, leaving only the smell of ash and the memory of the strange heartbeat in the walls. He sat up slowly, waiting to see if the sound returned. Nothing. Just a deep silence, so complete it felt like someone was holding their breath on the other side of the room. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his fans over his face. Maybe the noise last night had been a trick of exhaustion. Maybe grief had finally started leaking into his senses, turning shadows into pulses and creaks into phantom rhythms. But the moment he stood, the cabin answered with a long groan from the floorboards, a drawn-out whine that rose and fell like a sigh, almost as if it had been waiting for him to wake. He paused, listened. The silence pressed back. Then, under his feet, creak, creak, two slow shifts of the wood, measured, heavy, intentional. A chill slithered up Daniel's spine. He pulled on his boots, muttering under his breath. Old house, temperature change, settled down. But the cabin seemed to bristle at the words. The floorboard under his heel lifted slightly, an uneven bulge pushing up as though something living pressed against it from below. Daniel stepped back. The bulge flattened. The wood fell still. The kitchen wasn't much better. The single overhead bulb flickered in a fragile stutter. 3 short flashes, 1 long fade, then darkness, then back again. The same pattern repeating itself like a broken Morse code. He flipped the light switch a few times. The flickering didn't change. It pulsed. Like the walls last night. Like a heartbeat. Daniel swallowed hard. But he forced himself to move through it, busying his hands with coffee grounds, water, the kettle, routine, normalcy. He needed something to ground him before he drowned in the unease tightening around his ribs. The kettle hissed, steam curled, silence settled again. And then, creak. From the hallway this time. followed by the softest whisper of shifting wood. He turned sharply. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. But the sense of being watched, raw and focused, hung thick in the air. "The cabin listens," he muttered, sarcastically, shaking his head, but the moment he said it, a sudden coldness swept through the room, as though the structure had inhaled sharply. He froze. The bulb flickered twice. The floorboards trembled under his boots. A cupboard door swung open with a sharp crack. Daniel flinched. It wasn't the noise that frightened him. Cabins were drafty, unpredictable. It was the timing, the immediacy, the feeling that the place wasn't reacting at random, but reacting to him. Hours later, Daniel drove into the small mountain town for supplies. The general store sat crookedly at the edge of the single main road, its sign faded, its windows clouded with years of dust. When Daniel stepped inside, a cluster of silver bells over the door jangled sharply, too sharply, like metal shivering. The storekeeper, an older man with a wiry frame and a face carved by the wind, looked up from behind the counter. "You're the one who bought the Mercer cabin, aren't you?" His voice carried a heavy, cautious weight. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, just settling in." The man's expression tightened, not with curiosity, not with politeness, with warning. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Cabin been empty a while. Last tenant didn't stay long." Daniel forced a hollow laugh. "Drafty old building scared him off?" The storekeeper didn't smile. "Drafts don't whisper," he said quietly. Daniel stilled. The man continued, words slow, as if each one cost him something. "He said the place talked after dark, said it shifted its weight like something walking inside the walls, said it knew when he was scared." Daniel tried to hide the shiver that crawled up his spine. The storekeeper's gaze sharpened, studying Daniel's face. "You hearing anything yet?" "Just typical old house noises," Daniel lied. The man exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. "Then you best hope it stays that way." He bagged Daniel's supplies, paused, and added like a reluctant confession, "The cabin's always known why people come up there. People don't go to that place unless they're running from something." A beat. "And the cabin, it listens." Driving back through the forest, Daniel repeated the phrase under his breath. "The cabin listens." The words felt wrong in his mouth. Heavy. True. And when he returned, the cabin's front door, swollen shut that morning, stood wide open. As if welcoming him back. As if expecting him. As if it had been listening for his return.
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. Never open the door after midnight. Night settled over the forest like a heavy shroud, thick and unmoving. Not even the wind dared stir through the trees. The cabin sat hunched in the darkness, its wooden frame groaning softly, as if trying to warn Daniel of the hours ahead. He tried to sleep. Truly he did. He lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows crawled like veins. He listened to the ticking of his watch on the nightstand, each second landing with a dull, suffocating weight. 3:02 a.m. Still awake, still listening. A faint hum buzzed through the walls, a distant vibration, like something shifting its weight deep inside the wood. The same sensation from the night before. Not quite a sound, not quite silence. a presence somewhere in between. He turned onto his side, pulling the covers higher. Just the house, he whispered to himself, just the cold settling. But the cabin didn't settle. It waited. And at 3:17 a.m., the waiting ended. Knock! A single tap against the front door. Soft, barely audible. Daniel froze. Knock. 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 3 taps. Slow, measured, precise. His breath caught in his throat. Something inside him recognized the rhythm, not in his mind, but in his bones. He sat up, heart hammering with a painful familiarity. He didn't want to remember, but the memory forced itself forward anyway. The heart monitor. The way it beeped in those final moments. 3 slow beeps. A pause. Then silence. The same pattern. Exactly the same. His pulse skipped. For a long moment, he simply stared at the bedroom doorway, waiting to hear it again. The cabin held its breath. Then, knock, knock, knock. The same 3 taps, soft, like a small hand, like hers. A trembling whisper left his lips, involuntary and broken. "Don't open the door." The words came from a place deeper than thought, a primal warning echoing inside him, a mantra, a shield. "Don't open the door." He repeated again, this time louder. His voice quivered. He forced himself to stand. His legs felt hollow, unreal. Each step toward the hallway felt like stepping into deeper cold. The boards beneath his feet barely groaned now, as if the cabin itself was quieting to listen. "Don't open the door," he breathed again. The hallway stretched before him, long and dark. Moonlight seeped through the cracked window panes, silvering the dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. "Knock!" A single tap this time, closer, more deliberate. Daniel approached the living room, feeling the temperature drop with each step. The air grew tighter, pressing against his chest like invisible hands. The front door stood tall and looming. Its wooden surface caught the faint light. The metal latch trembled slightly, as though something on the other side breathed against it. "Don't open the door." His daughter's voice echoed in his memory. Not the way she sounded at the hospital, but the way she laughed when she was small, light, innocent, alive. "Daddy, don't—" He clenched his fists. Another knock came, softer than the last, almost gentle, almost pleading. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. The same rhythm. The exact same rhythm. Daniel stepped closer despite himself. His body responded to the familiarity before his mind could protest. His hand lifted toward the doorknob and stopped an inch away. A coldness radiated from the metal. Not the natural cold of a winter night. A deeper cold. A wrong cold. His breath fogged the air. Behind the door, something shifted its weight. The wood gave a faint creak, like a footstep on the porch. Daniel staggered back. He whispered again, almost chanting now. "Don't open the door! Don't open the door!" The latch rattled. Just once, just enough to freeze him in place. It wasn't the wind. He knew that immediately. The movement was too controlled, too intentional, too aware of him. The latch stopped. Silence smothered the room.
Then a soft, delicate whisper seeped through the crack under the door, a breathy, almost childlike sound. "Daniel?" Not a voice he recognized, but a voice that knew his name. Daniel stumbled backward, hitting the wall behind him. His skin crawled with an icy panic. He wanted to shut his eyes, but he couldn't look away from the door, from the shadow beneath it, from the faint movement brushing against the wood. "Don't open the door," he whispered again, more desperate now. And finally, mercifully, the knocking stopped. The cabin fell into a stillness so deep it felt unnatural. Dead. Expectant. Daniel backed away until he reached his bedroom. He slammed the door, locked it, pressed his back against it as if bracing for something to push through. The house stayed quiet. But just before he collapsed onto the bed, just before he dared to close his eyes, he heard it again. A slow, dragging sound from the living room floorboards. Like something turning away. Like something disappointed. Like something that knew he would open the door. Eventually.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. Your grief has a footstep. The morning after the knocking, Daniel moved through the cabin like a man walking inside a cold memory, slowly, carefully, afraid to disturb something that might wake up again. Every board beneath his feet groaned, as though the cabin disapproved of his presence, the sounds stretching into long wooden sighs. Outside, the world was silent. No wind, no birds, no movement except for the breath of fog drifting between the trees. The forest looked frozen in place, holding its posture like a portrait painted in muted grays. Daniel stepped onto the porch, exhaling the stale air from his lungs. He hadn't slept. He hardly blinked. He could still hear the knocking every time he shut his eyes. 3 taps, each one soft enough to sound innocent, but heavy enough to make his stomach twist. He whispered the phrase the storekeeper had said, tasting dread as he repeated it. The cabin listens. But this morning, the forest listened too. He could feel it. He wrapped his coat tighter, stepping off the porch. The frost-covered ground crackled faintly under his boots, the cold clinging to the edges of the world. He needed fresh air. He needed distance from the door. But 10 steps from the porch, he froze. There, pressed into the thin frost beside the cabin wall, were footprints. Small ones. Child-sized. They circled the cabin in an uneven loop, starting near the porch, trailing along the siding, stopping directly beneath his bedroom window. His mouth dried. He crouched, examining them. The indentations were shallow but distinct, preserved perfectly in the cold morning light. Toes, arches, heels, the unmistakable outline of a small, bare foot. His throat tightened painfully. "No," he whispered. "No, not possible." But something inside him disagreed. Something that had been whispering to him since the night he arrived. Something that recognized patterns before he did. He followed the trail slowly, each step tightening his chest. The prints circled once, twice, then veered toward the back of the cabin before disappearing abruptly, as though whatever made them had simply lifted off the ground or stepped inside. A faint tremor rolled through the house behind him, just a subtle shift of wood like the cabin adjusting its spine. Daniel swallowed hard. Grief follows you. Sometimes it walks. He wasn't sure where the words came from. Maybe memory. Maybe madness. Maybe the house itself. He ran a hand over his face and forced himself to walk toward the window. Frost had gathered along the glass in thin crystalline patterns, delicate but disturbed. Something had touched it, something with small hands. He leaned closer, breath fogging the pain. That was when he saw them. Handprints. Tiny ones. Pressed against the outside of the glass. 5 small fingers, a small palm, perfectly shaped, perfectly placed. He stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the icy ground. "No," his voice quavered. "No, please, no." The handprints were unmistakable. They weren't smudges. They weren't accidents. They were purposeful, clear, human. And they were at the height of a child his daughter's age. His stomach knotted. His head throbbed. He backed away from the window, staring at the prints as though they might fade if he looked hard enough. But they didn't fade. They seemed to glow faintly in the morning frost, as though the cold itself remembered the touch. He retreated into the cabin, slamming the door behind him. The impact echoed through the walls like a shout. The cabin creaked in response. A slow stretch of timber, a long shudder through the floorboards, like something waking up. Daniel pressed his back against the door, chest heaving. Grief follows you. Sometimes it walks. The phrase hung in the air like breath in winter. The cabin listened. It always listened. As he moved through the living room, the feeling of being watched trailed behind him like a cold shadow. Every corner seemed darker. Every window felt like an open eye. The house had shifted during the night, he was certain of it. The air felt different, heavy, saturated with something that didn't belong. A sudden thump from the hallway made him jump. Just one step. Light. Small. Like a child testing the floor. His pulse spiked. "No," he whispered. "No, not again. Not now." Another footstep. Then silence. He inched toward the hallway, peering around the corner cautiously. Nothing there. Just the same dim corridor, stretching toward the bedroom like a throat of darkness. But something was different. A faint trail of frost lay across the floorboards, too thin to be natural, too focused in its direction. It led from the front door, toward the hallway, toward his bedroom. He followed it with trembling eyes. The frost ended at his bedroom door, thin wisps of ice crystallized around the bottom edge, like something cold had stood there for a long time, waiting. Daniel gripped the doorframe. His breath slowed. Then the door turned, very slightly, as if responding to his presence. He stumbled back, heart pounding against his ribs, and from behind the door came the faintest sound, a soft patter, like bare feet stepping once, then stillness. His whisper cracked through the quiet. "Grief follows you. Sometimes it walks." The door didn't open, but the footsteps moved away, slowly, reluctantly, as though the thing on the other side had heard him and didn't like the reminder.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Something Knows Her Name. Evening gathered around the cabin like a tightening fist, each hour darker, each shadow heavier. Daniel lit every lamp in the house, but the light felt thin, fragile, unable to push back the weight of the night pressing against the windows. He moved from room to room, pacing in uneven circles, checking locks, checking curtains, checking the floorboards for frost. None tonight. None yet. He didn't know whether that should comfort him or terrify him. The silence was strange tonight, different from the usual cabin hush. It felt too clean, as though something had wiped sound away intentionally. Even the forest outside seemed muted. No wind, no branches scraping the siding, just an oppressive, unnatural stillness. Daniel paused in the living room, listening. Nothing. But the nothingness was thick, watching, waiting. He whispered the warning to himself again, the only thing that kept him anchored when his thoughts spiraled. It knows what only she knew. He wasn't sure when he started saying it, only that the phrase felt truer by the hour. The first knock didn't come tonight. Instead, at 3:17 a.m., he heard something worse. A whisper. So soft at first he thought it was a draft slipping under the door, a gentle, airy murmuring that rose and fell like breath. Daniel turned toward the door slowly. Ha. A sound like lips trying to remember a shape. A sound like a voice practicing a name. He stepped backward, heart thudding. No, not tonight. But the whisper grew clearer, each breath sharpening, each syllable forming with painful precision. The cabin held its breath. The lamps flickered. Cold seeped across the floor like creeping ink. Then the whisper formed a single word. A name. His daughter's name. Perfectly pronounced, perfectly pitched, perfectly hers. Daniel's knees weakened. He gripped the back of the couch to keep from collapsing. The voice came again, soft, childlike, as familiar as memory. "Daddy." His breath shattered. He squeezed his eyes shut. He nearly answered, but something inside him, some glimmer of instinct beyond grief, held him back. The voice was too perfect, too clean, too deliberate. The precision of it felt wrong, like a puppet with strings pulled by cold, unseen fingers. He shook his head, backing away from the door. "No, you're not her." The whisper paused. Then it laughed. A small, airy giggle, his daughter's giggle, light and tinkling and unmistakable. Daniel covered his mouth, choking on a sob, not because the sound brought joy, but because of how precisely it matched her. Not similar, not close, identical. And that impossibility made the sound unbearable. The whisper pressed against the door again, voice softening into a near pleading cry. "Daddy, open, please." He shook violently. The door shuddered under a small knock, just one this time, a tiny tap, like a small fist testing the wood. His whole body trembled, because that was exactly how she knocked when she was little. Just one soft tap, followed by a giggle. "It knows what only she knew," he whispered, voice cracking. But the voice outside did not stop. It did not hesitate. Instead, it began reciting something, softly, sweetly, as if telling a bedtime story. "Once, upon a time." Daniel froze. His wife used to read that story every night. She stopped after her daughter got sick. He had read it instead. And then the voice said something that made Daniel's blood run to ice. "The princess got scared of the thunder, so Daddy held her hand." Daniel's breath vanished. He had never told anyone that, not even his wife. It happened during a summer storm when his daughter was 4, just the two of them awake, just the two of them in the dark hallway, her small hand gripping his so tight her little nails dug into his skin. This thing shouldn't know that. It couldn't know that. His legs nearly buckled. It knows what only she knew, he whispered again. It knows what only she knew. The whisper began humming now, a soft melody, a bedtime tune. The same one he used to hum for her when she was sick, when the medication made her restless. A tune he could barely remember, but the voice remembered it perfectly. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, shaking his head violently. "No! Stop! Stop!" But the humming only grew sweeter, clearer, closer. The cold beneath the door thickened, spreading across the floor like a living shadow. Frost crawled along the wood in delicate branching lines. Then the whisper spoke again, this time in a tone that wasn't his daughter's at all. Something deeper, older, amused. "Let me in, Daniel." He stumbled backward, tripping over the rug. The lamps flickered violently, dimming to thin strands of light barely clinging to the dark. And then the voice shifted back to hers, perfect again, soft, gentle. "Daddy, please." Daniel collapsed against the far wall, breathing in panicked bursts. Tears blurred his vision. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream. He wanted to open the door and hold her. But he did none of those things. He just whispered over and over, "It knows what only she knew. It knows what only she knew." And from the other side of the door, the whisper slowly fell silent. The humming ceased. The frost stopped spreading. But the presence, whatever wore his daughter's voice like a mask, did not leave. He could feel it standing there, listening, breathing, smiling, and waiting.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. The Woods Remember What You Forgot. The morning after the whispering voice, Daniel left the cabin without looking back. He didn't care about the frost still clinging to the windows. He didn't care about the cold draft slithering across the living room floor. He didn't even care about the faint, almost playful tapping that followed him as he grabbed his coat. He just needed to breathe. He needed space. He needed distance from the door that said his daughter's name. The woods seemed safer than the cabin. At least out here, the trees didn't pretend to be someone they weren't. The forest swallowed him quickly. Tall pines rose like pillars in a cathedral of winter, their branches bending beneath the weight of early frost. The air was sharp and metallic, a cold that felt alive, as if it were tasting him. Daniel moved deeper, boots crunching through icy undergrowth. He told himself he was searching for logic, tracks, evidence, footprints that weren't supernatural. Something rational to anchor him before he drifted too far into madness. But the forest had other ideas. Minutes passed, hours maybe. Time stretched strangely beneath the dark canopy, each breath thick and slow. Then Daniel saw something unusual, a shape hanging from a low branch. He approached cautiously. It was a small structure made of twigs, delicate, woven together into a narrow, zigzagging pattern. It looked like a strange child's craft, crude yet intentional. The twigs were bent into a sequence of peaks and dips, a rhythm. Daniel's chest tightened. He recognized that shape, a heartbeat, a monitor's readout. Her heartbeat. "No," he whispered, stepping back. But then he saw another totem hanging from a nearby branch, and another, and another. They surrounded him. Tiny twig heartbeats dangling from trees like macabre ornaments. Each one identical, each one a perfect copy of the final rhythm before silence. Daniel's breath fogged heavily in the air. This isn't real," he muttered, shaking his head. "Someone made these, someone put them here." But the forest disagreed. A cold wind swept through the trees, but there was no movement in the branches, no rustling, no shift of pine needles, only a voice carried through the air. Not a whisper like at the cabin door, not a child imitating innocence. This voice was deeper, older, resonant enough to vibrate inside his ribs. "You forgot the truth." Daniel spun, searching the trees. "Who's there?" His voice cracked. The forest answered with silence. Then the voice came again, closer now, threading between the trees with unnatural clarity. "We did not." Daniel stumbled backwards until his shoulder hit a tree trunk. Frost flaked off the bark and drifted to the ground like ash. His lungs tightened. His throat felt too small. "No," he breathed. "No! No, I remember everything." But the forest didn't believe him, and neither did he. Memories he had tried to bury began clawing their way to the surface. The argument, the yelling, his wife's tear-filled eyes. His daughter sitting quietly in the back seat, hugging her stuffed rabbit as the tension pulsed around her. The road, the rain, the mist second, the red light he didn't see. He squeezed his eyes shut, gripping his head. "Stop," he whispered. "Please, stop!" But the woods weren't done with him. A twig snapped behind him. Daniel turned sharply. A small figure stood several yards away. No taller than a child. Still, silent, its outline barely visible through the haze of cold fog. Daniel took a step forward. The figure stepped back, but the posture, the height, the smallness of it made his heart lurch painfully. "Sweetheart," he whispered. A dangerous hope clawed up his throat. But when the fog thinned for a heartbeat, he saw the figure clearly. Not a child, not even human. A bundle of sticks, woven together with impossible precision. Arms, legs, a small torso, a head bent at an unnatural angle. And on its face, smeared across the bark-like surface, were symbols, like cardiac readouts, drawn in jagged lines. Daniel stumbled back, choking on fear. The twig figure stepped towards him, one careful footfall at a time, just like the small footsteps circling the cabin. Its head tilted, as if studying him. Then a sound escaped its wooden chest. A heartbeat. Slow, dragging, uneven, just like hers. Daniel turned and ran. Branches clawed at his coat, frost stung his cheeks, the wood seemed to shift around him. Trees bending, shadows creeping, paths twisting out of place. His breath came in violent bursts, his legs burned. Behind him the heartbeat followed. Thump. Dump-dump. Thump. "You forgot the truth," the forest whispered. "We did not." When Daniel finally broke through the tree line and saw the cabin again, he nearly collapsed. He threw himself inside, slamming the door behind him. But the forest's message clung to him like frost, and in the silence that followed he knew. The woods remembered everything, even the things he tried to bury, especially the things he tried to bury.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. She's Not the One Knocking. Night returned with a suffocating heaviness, settling over the cabin like a thick blanket that smothered every sound. Daniel sat in the living room with every lamp turned on, yet the light felt dimmer tonight, paler, as if the darkness had teeth and was chewing through the glow one bite at a time. He kept his back pressed against the couch, staring at the front door as if it might breathe. The woods still whispered in his mind, their message repeated in a looping echo. You forgot the truth. We did not. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the twig figure, the heartbeat carved into its chest, the way it stepped toward him like a memory wearing legs. He rubbed his hands together, restless and trembling. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to be anywhere. The whole world felt thin, like ice ready to crack under the weight of something crawling beneath it. But running wasn't an option. Not anymore. Not after everything he had seen. The cabin creaked suddenly, loud and sharp like a bone snapping. Daniel flinched. The hallway lamp flickered once, then steadied. He waited, held his breath. The house fell still again. Minutes trickled by like thick drops of cold water. The clock hands crawled toward the inevitable. 3:17 a.m. Daniel's pulse quickened. He braced himself. The knocking always came at this time. Soft taps, small, almost shy. His daughter's heartbeat in wood. But tonight, the silence stretched unnaturally long. Too long. A quiet dread seeped into his chest. He leaned forward, straining to hear anything at all. Then, knock. A single violent slam against the door that rattled the frame. Daniel's breath jolted out of him. That wasn't her. Another knock followed, longer, deeper, dragging through the wood like claws instead of knuckles. Knock. Daniel scrambled backwards across the floor. No, that's not her, he whispered, shaking. The door shuddered under the impact, dust falling from the hinges. Then came the rhythm. Not the soft 3 taps he had learned to fear, not the heartbeat he knew by memory and nightmare. This pattern was wrong, irregular, stretched, collapsing in on itself. Thump, dump, thump. A stumbling, fractured sequence, like something trying to remember how a heart should beat. It borrowed her rhythm. It borrowed her rhythm, Daniel whispered shakily. Another hit slammed into the door, jarring the entire cabin. The lights flickered, once, twice, before stabilizing weakly. A voice seeped through the cracks in the wood. Not a whisper, not a child's plea. A low, layered moan, like multiple throats trying to speak through one small mouth. Daddy-o. The sound vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't just outside. It was around him. Inside the walls, under the floor, breathing through the structure like the cabin itself was alive. Daniel pressed his hands over his ears, teeth gritted. But the voice didn't stop. It grew deeper, hungrier. And tangled beneath that monstrous tone, he heard his daughter's voice. Thin and fading, like someone speaking underwater. Daddy, don't! His heart plummeted. Sweetheart, he voiced, cracked. But her voice drowned beneath the other one, smothered, consumed. Whatever was outside the door had used her voice before. But now it was done pretending. Now it spoke in its own tongue. A harsh guttural churning of syllables that scraped against Daniel's mind like broken glass. Ketu, Narara, Anyil. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. The door bowed inward suddenly, just a fraction, like something massive leaned against it.
Daniel stumbled backwards in panic. The lights pulsed in rhythmic waves now. Bright, dim, bright, dim. A heartbeat. Not hers. Not his. Its. "It wants yours next," Daniel whispered, trembling uncontrollably. The pounding abruptly stopped. Silence crashed into the room with stunning force. Then slowly, very slowly, a small, delicate knock tapped the wood. Just once. His daughter's knock. A brutal dagger of grief twisted into Daniel's chest. "Baby?" he whispered through clenched teeth. Silence. Then, a soft sob. Her sob. Daniel staggered forward, stopping only inches from the door. Tears blurred his vision. "Sweetheart," he murmured, reaching out. The door sucked inward as something pressed its mouth directly against the crack. A whisper crawled through, soft and aching. "Let me wear your heart, Daddy." Daniel recoiled with a strangled gasp. The lights went out. The cabin exhaled. The darkness pressed in. And outside, something enormous scraped a single claw across the wooden door, leaving a long, splitting, unmistakable mark. A warning, a promise, a claim.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. The Dead Don't Come Alone. The cabin didn't sleep that night. It waited. Daniel sat in the dark living room with every lamp dead, every shadow stretched tall, every breath shallow. He hadn't turned the lights off himself. They had simply flickered, sputtered, and surrendered one by one, leaving the room painted in moonlit ash. Outside, the cold pressed against the windows like a held breath. Inside, Daniel felt the silence tighten around him, a noose of dread he couldn't loosen. He whispered the words he didn't want to believe but couldn't escape. The dead knock to be remembered, the others knock to be let inside. He didn't know where the phrase came from, but the moment he said it, something responded. A sound. Not a knock. Not yet. A footstep. Heavy. Dragging. Not the light patter of the childlike presence that circled his cabin days before. This step carried weight. A slow scrape, a heel dragging through wet leaves, one foot searching for the ground. Daniel froze. Another step followed, then another. Not directly outside the door this time, but circling the house, slow, methodical loops. The cabin stiffened around him, its walls groaning with tension. The floorboards shivered beneath Daniel's feet as if trying to recoil. He whispered shakily, "Someone's out there." But he knew better. There was more than one. A second set of footsteps joined the first, faster, uneven, limping. A third followed, lighter but erratic, the steps falling in jarring, unnatural rhythms. Then a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. Soon the cabin was surrounded, enclosed by the slow grind of bodies moving through the frozen earth. Daniel stepped backward until his spine hit the far wall. The footsteps didn't wander aimlessly. They were pacing, encircling, searching for a weakness. The house felt too small, too fragile, too thin to hold them back. A sudden thump struck the siding, then another, then another. Not knocks, not yet. Just testing. Daniel forced himself to look at the nearest window. Moonlight filtered through the glass, pale and cold. Frost blurred the edges of the pane like a curtain. And then something moved behind the frost. A shadow. Tall, bent, twisted at an angle human bones couldn't match. Daniel's breath hitched. The shadow leaned closer, and as it did, two more joined it. One short and wide, the other impossibly thin, stretched like a smear of darkness trying to stand upright. They didn't knock. Not yet. They pressed against the window, distorting their shapes with impossible bends. Daniel stumbled back, heart pounding in his throat. No faces, no eyes, just silhouettes trying to remember what being human felt like. He whispered again, voice trembling. The dead knock to be remembered, the others knock to be let inside. The forest echoed the words back, distantly, like a dying breath carried on a cold wind. Suddenly, loud, sharp, jarring, a knock struck the back door. A single, heavy blow. Daniel spun around, staring at the door behind him. The wood bowed inward slightly, dust falling from the hinges. Then another knock, this one at the front door. Then another on the window. Then two more on the walls. The cabin was being knocked on from all sides. Not rhythmic, not pleading, not childlike, just a cacophony of desperate fists, some small, some enormous, some jagged like bone, hammering against the wood with ravenous intent. Daniel covered his ears, dropping to his knees. "Stop! Stop! Please stop!" But they weren't listening. The knocking grew louder, faster, hungrier. The shadows outside multiplied, crowding the windows until no moonlight remained. Their forms overlapped, twisted, dripping with unnatural angles. A voice rose above the sound, a deep, rasping whisper that seemed to come from all of them at once. "Remember us." Daniel's chest seized. Then a different voice wove beneath it, higher, sharper, dripping with malice. "Let us in." The floorboards trembled, the cabin moaned, something enormous slammed into the north wall hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Daniel crawled backward, hands trembling violently. The knocking escalated into a relentless assault. Hundreds of blows striking the cabin, shaking it, cracking it, splintering it. And then, silence. A silence so abrupt, it felt like the world stopped breathing. Daniel looked up, chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. The shadows at the windows stood still. Then one of them leaned closer, pressing its face, or whatever passed for a face, directly against the glass. A long, slow crack appeared down the window pane. The shadow whispered, voice wet and eager, "Open the door." Daniel scrambled to his feet, backing away as the glass bulged inward. Another crack, another. The dead didn't knock anymore. They clawed, they pulled, they demanded. Daniel covered his mouth to stifle the scream as the glass finally split, a sliver opening just enough for a single blackened fingertip to slip through, scratching the air, before curling inward, beckoning him closer. The cabin exhaled, and the shadows whispered as one.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 9. If you open the door, it opens you. The cabin felt smaller now, as if the walls had crept inward during the night, inch by inch, breath by breath. Daniel pressed his back against the far wall of the living room, staring at the front door like it was something alive. The wood was no longer smooth. Long, jagged cracks spread across its surface like veins, pulsing faintly in the dim light. The window beside it was fractured, small shards missing from the edges where the shadow had slipped its finger through hours earlier. The air tasted metallic. thick, waiting. The footsteps outside had stopped, but the silence was worse. Silence meant intention. Silence meant planning. Silence meant the house wasn't alone anymore. Daniel whispered the phrase, almost to steady himself. Some doors are meant to stay closed. But the house answered with a low groan, a deep bending of its wooden frame as if disagreeing. He stepped forward hesitantly, unable to stop himself. The cabin floorboards trembled under each footfall, vibrating like something large lurked beneath them. He paused in front of the door. The doorknob, once silver, now tarnished and darkening, seemed to pulse. A faint heat radiated from it, then cold, then heat again, almost like a heartbeat. Daniel swallowed hard. He had to end this. Whatever was outside, whatever was wearing his daughter's voice, whatever brought shadows to life, would not stop on its own. His hand hovered inches from the doorknob. "Show yourself! No more tricks! No more voices! Come out and face me!" As if in answer, the lamp in the corner flickered 3 times. Then the doorknob moved. Not a little twitch, not a tiny shiver. It twisted. Deliberate, slow, turning inward towards Daniel's hand like an invitation. Daniel stumbled back with a cry, heart punching against his ribs. "No, no, no, stop!" But the door ignored him. The knob turned further, metal groaning under invisible fingers. As it rotated, the surface darkened, first gray, then charcoal, then pure, consuming black. A mark spread across it, a smudged imprint of something that had touched it. A handprint. 5 elongated digits, too long for a child, too thin for an adult, perfectly preserved as though burned into the metal. Daniel's lungs constricted. His throat closed. The handprint pulsed once, releasing a faint hiss, like exhaled breath. He staggered backward, knocking into the coffee table. The doorknob twisted again, forcing itself inches open, before the cabin shuddered violently, slamming it back into place. The entire house moaned like something massive pressed against it from outside. Then, crack-oom! A violent knock shook the frame. Dust rained from the ceiling. The walls vibrated with the impact. Then another, and another, each blow stronger, more violent, more determined. Daniel clutched the table for support, teeth rattling in his skull. "Knock! Knock! Me! Knock! In!" The voice seeped through the cracks, 2 tones layered violently over one another. His daughter's. And something else. Something hungry. Daniel's nails dug into the wood of the table. "Stop!" he shouted, though his voice was lost beneath the deafening blows. He turned toward the door again, and froze. The cracks across the door were spreading, rapidly, crawling like black lightning. The wood bulged outward, once, twice, as if something enormous pressed its face against the other side, pushing, stretching the surface like skin. Daniel stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. It shattered on the floor, plunging half the room into darkness. Another blow struck the door, not with a fist, but with a claw. A long, jagged mark scraped downward, splitting the wood cleanly. Cold air poured through the crack, chilling Daniel's bones. The cabin didn't feel protective anymore. It felt scared. as if something worse than itself was at the threshold. Daniel whispered, trembling, "Some doors are meant to stay closed." But something in the dark whispered back, inside the house, a faint voice behind him, right behind him, "Especially the ones within you." Daniel spun. Nothing was there, only shadows breathing in the corners. He backed toward the center of the room, and the front door slammed inward a full inch, just enough to reveal a sliver of absolute darkness. Not outside night, not absence of light, a darkness that felt alive, a darkness that leaned forward. Daniel screamed, pushing the door shut with all his strength. The wood burned cold under his palms. Something pushed back, heavy, deliberate, patient. Then the pressure stopped. The door stilled. The silence returned, quiet, suffocating, absolute. Daniel collapsed to his knees. His breathing slowed. He almost believed it was over, until he heard the whisper through the crack beneath the door, a soft, mocking promise, "If you open the door, I open you." The doorknob twitched once, then fell still.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. The Last Knock is Yours. By dawn, the cabin no longer felt like a shelter. It felt like a mouth. Its walls strained inward, its beams trembled with each breath of wind, its doors groaned as though dreaming of opening themselves. Daniel stood in the center of the living room, exhausted, trembling, half convinced that the cabin's next inhale would swallow him whole. He whispered to steady himself, "Some doors are meant to stay closed." The cabin gave a long, low creak in response. Not argument, not agreement, just acknowledgement. Daniel pressed a hand over his chest, feeling his heartbeat, a frantic, uneven rhythm barely staying afloat. He knew now what the thing outside wanted. It wasn't after his daughter. It wasn't even after the house. It was after him. Not his voice, not his memories. His heart. His remorse. His guilt. Daniel understood too late. It fed on unfinished grief. It entered through regret. It wore what we refused to face. The realization made him sink to his knees. He pressed his palms to the floor and whispered her name, his daughter's true name, the one he hadn't spoken aloud since the funeral. The floorboards chilled beneath his touch, then warmed, then chilled again. The cabin was listening. He whispered to the room, to the woods, to the thing outside, all at once. "I'm sorry. I never meant to forget. I never meant for any of it to happen." Silence enveloped him, a heavy, suffocating silence. Then, from somewhere deep within the cabin, a tiny, fragile voice spoke. "Daddy?" Daniel jerked upright. Her voice. Not the imitation, not the layered monstrosity that twisted her words into knives. This was her, soft, pure, trembling with fear. "Sweetheart," Daniel whispered, crawling toward the hallway. "Baby, where are you?" Her voice cracked. Don't let it wear me, Daddy." His blood froze. He reached the hallway, every shadow stretching like a warning. "Where are you?" he cried softly. Silence. Then, "It hurts. It's pulling my memories. Daddy, please, please don't." Her voice cut off abruptly, drowned by a wet, guttural hiss. Daniel clapped a hand over his mouth. No, not her. Not again." The walls around him vibrated, not violently, but like someone dragging their fingers across the inside of the wood, tracing patterns. A whisper seeped through the cracks. "Your guilt tastes sweet." Daniel stumbled backward, heart hammering. "You can't have her," he hissed. "You can't!" The cabin's lights flickered, the shadows pulsed, and the front door, the one thing separating Daniel from whatever waited outside, began to breathe. In, out, in, out. The wood expanding and shrinking with each inhale. Daniel screamed, "Show yourself!" The door answered with a booming crack, as something enormous slammed against it. The hinges buckled, the frame split. Cold air rushed in like the breath of the grave. Daniel braced himself, ready for the final knock. But it didn't come from the door, or the walls, or the windows. It came from behind him. A single, quiet knock. Right behind his back. In the hallway. Inside the cabin. Daniel turned slowly, breath trembling. The hallway stretched before him like a throat of darkness. At the very end, right beside his bedroom door, a small shadow stood. Her height, her outline, her stillness. Daniel whispered, "No." The shape took one small step forward, a soft footfall like a child testing cold ground. "Daddy," it whispered. Her voice, perfect, identical. But Daniel was done being fooled. He stepped back, another step. His heart pounded so loud it drowned out the creaking walls. "Sweetheart," he whispered, tears burning his eyes, "if that's really you, tell me something. Tell me something only you would—" The figure tilted its head. Then its voice changed, split, twisted, warped. "Daddy." The sound crawled under his skin. Daniel backed away until he hit the front door. The figure vanished, blinked out of existence like a candle snuffed by unseen fingers. Silence. Then a small knock tapped the inside of the door behind Daniel. His breath caught. The last knock. Not outside. Inside. The room went ice cold. Frost crept along the door frame. The lights flickered and died. Daniel whispered the truth he should have known all along. It doesn't want to be let in. A second knock came, harder this time, slamming into the wood like a hist full of bone. Daniel trembled violently, tears streaking down his face. He finished the sentence. "It wants to take your place." The doorknob twisted from the inside, and the chapter ends with Daniel's scream swallowed by darkness. Grief comes for all of us. Some of us run from it, some drown in it. But Daniel learned the truth too late. When you refuse to face your past, something else will. Something patient, something hungry. Every knock on his door was a warning, every whisper a reminder, every shadow a lesson carved in bone. The dead don't seek closure, they seek company. You've heard his story, you've followed the knocks, you've listened to the dark scratch its way closer. Now here's the part no one wants to face. What Daniel tried to escape is what we all carry inside us. Grief doesn't disappear. It waits, it watches. And when you ignore it long enough, it starts knocking. So let me ask you, right now, before the night gets any quieter, when the dead start knocking on your door, will you answer